So, Netflix is driving itself off a cliff. I'm going to cover what happened, why, and analyze the move from a business perspective. Spoiler alert, it's not good. So all of this went down about a week and a half ago when Netflix let slip that they're going to restrict viewing to a single location, which basically is the opposite of what the family plan was marketed as. And it's more like the original service. As you can imagine, this went over extremely poorly. I'm sure you can find complaints of it on their Facebook page, Twitter, and I'm sure their customer service has been just barraged with complaints, which already is eating into those extra profits they were hoping to make. And it's going to continue as they run into more and more problems with rolling out this preposterous change. Anyway, so Netflix's response to this was, oh, we didn't mean it. It's just for some other country, don't worry about it. And basically they were walking it back, which is sort of the usual PR thing when something bad happens these days. You know, the response seems to be like, oh, we weren't expecting this kind of backlash, which if true, means they didn't do the proper research in the first place to find out how their customers would react if there was even a market for it, I guess, or if the market would sustain such a change. But they were probably just hoping to make the change and have people let it slide and just go with the flow like all the previous price hikes, which have been, you know, just progressive over the last few years, or a long time actually. But then, a few days ago, I got this message when I tried to log into Netflix. As you can see, they want to establish one household where viewing happens. And you can find more of the specifics if you want to go through all the details on their website, especially because they are changing things. So if one or more person wants to travel for work, or you want to watch while on lunch break, or at the library if you're a student, or if your kid's just away for a couple of months on an exchange, they're not allowed to use Netflix. Or if you want a vacation for more than just a week or two, based on what they were originally saying, it's going to cause problems for you as a subscriber. And this is almost certainly motivated by a decline in subscriber growth, and maybe their hope is to either force the 4 people, or of the 4 people, or however many can be on a family plan, into 3 new accounts, or create a new price class for the service that you were just thought that you had already. And so I think it's, I don't know, $7.99 or $8.99 per person that they want to tack on top of the family plan to have them be able to watch from another place. It's like, this is what it was for. And I'm fairly certain they marketed it as such at the time. But it's not consumer friendly regardless. And fundamentally it's rooted in either greed, incompetence, or both. So, how did we get here? Well, largely it's been down to Netflix shooting itself in its foot repeatedly. They clearly don't understand some core concepts like barriers to entry, price elasticity, perceived value, and competitive advantages, and just, in some regard, the market itself. Originally, when Netflix started, they were the dominant, and they weren't the only one in sort of this field. YouTube, as a indirect competitor at the time, was there. There were some other services like, I don't even remember their names. They still exist, some of them, but I don't care. Maybe I will now. But that's anyway, I'll get back to that. So they were more or less, they more or less had a monopoly over the industry. So that was back when, after they were doing their DVD subscription model and switched to online streaming, they had a low price, a good offering, and it was widely available. And they increased the prices from there. And then they continued to do so repeatedly. And then again, as I mentioned, they took their original service where you could watch on multiple devices at the same time. Suddenly it was, you can only watch it on one screen at a time, which was fine. It was cheap. Still widely available. And it was more compelling than piracy because better quality videos, you don't have to deal with spam ads and stuff. They also had a great mix of content. But at the time around when Netflix was starting streaming, and back when I was in university, there was a very misinformed concept of what a business model looked like. And so you'd hear people talk about, kind of infinite growth plans. Not that you can't have a business that continues to grow when you expand and have different offerings, but no, the concept that people were sort of pitching was, okay, we're going to have this subscription plan, people are going to buy in, and then we're going to add extra features. These extra features are going to have some value to people, and then we're going to jack up the prices, and then just continue to do that. You can't do that indefinitely because there is a limit that the market will tolerate for that service. And I'll get back to that a little bit later. So that's kind of the thought process Netflix went down, and at different points as the prices increased, people left. So, and that brings me to sort of one of the key business concepts, which is barriers to entry. Different industries have barriers to entry, and they can be something like a knowledge base or something difficult like a relationship. Say in China, for example, a barrier to enter that market would be being able to cooperate with the Chinese government and having that permission to do so. Other barriers to entry are, like I said, knowledge. So if you're doing, a game, software, artificial intelligence, something like that, where you have to come to the table with a good understanding of what you're doing. It may not stop people from entering, but it will inhibit them, and that's really what all these barriers are. Other things like licenses, cost, all of these things are barriers to entry. So one of them is established rivals. So Netflix, again, being sort of the dominant and pretty much singular streaming service, was an established rival. So any new and early entrants into the market had a lot to compete with. Netflix was very well priced, and so all the ones that I recall that started, because everyone and their dog wanted a piece of this action, and most of those services don't exist anymore. I think Shomi was one of them. Anyway, there are a whole bunch. I didn't commit them all to memory. And so they lost out to Netflix because they just couldn't compete with the amount of content they had at that price, and having already captured most of the market at that time, Netflix more or less was a monopoly for the future to come, until they decided to raise their prices, which meant that as they raised their prices, that created an opening for competitors to enter at, because now their competitive advantage can be, we're cheaper than Netflix. We might not have as much content, but we're cheaper than Netflix. Seemed to be pretty successful. As Amazon Prime got in after that, Hulu, I think, was one of the early ones as well. Down the road, Disney Plus and all of those other ones. Especially now, because it's going crazy now, because those other companies have also raised their prices, which meant now everyone can make a streaming service, which is only going to end badly because reasons I'll get into a bit later. With that, with the cost of alternatives being compelling, I'm going to start getting into the state of the economy's effect on the market of most goods, and also price elasticity, which is an economics concept. And they're fairly intertwined here. So in a recession, as I'm sure you can easily imagine, people tend to tighten their belts as stuff gets more expensive and their income decreases, or decreases relative to the cost of goods at the very least. So with that in mind, generally speaking, prices become more elastic, which basically means the amount consumers are willing to tolerate in terms of price changes. So you'll see it with luxury goods in a recession, and sort of the, not necessarily luxury goods for the very wealthy, because they often are relatively secure in terms of weathering recessions and depressions, as a good increases in its price. So what's a good example? Let's say gasoline. This isn't going to be a perfect analogy, but say the price of bronze, or what is it, 87 octane, 89? No, 87, silver is 89. Say that went up to just a hair, maybe a cent under silver. Well, suddenly, you're not going to buy that anymore. You're going to buy silver. So in this context, it's a little bit different in that people will just stop buying an item if the price increases too much. So if it's, you know, those things that you like to have but don't really need, kind of like Netflix. So in a recession, if you want to capture more market share, the best thing to do, in most cases, again, there are no guarantees ever. As Netflix, I'm sure, is learning now with their harebrained idea. The best thing they can do, generally speaking, is to lower their prices. That makes it much more compelling of an offering. Because just think about it. Say you're going to go to one of two restaurants, and then you learn, hey, this one's more expensive now. They're not paying their staff anymore, they're not paying any more for rent, but it's more expensive. This other option, did their prices go down? I like this place, let's just go here. Suddenly you're going to go there, and go there a lot more often because it's cheaper. It's basically also a matter of demand versus price, and there are curves in economics that say you want to optimize the point where... Okay, here's an illustration for elasticity. This chart shows dollars per unit on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis, as you can see, and the demand curve would hypothetically illustrate the amount of subscriptions people might buy relative to the price. As you can see, as the price gets cheaper, more people will buy it. And on the right-hand side, that limit where the chart ends, we're just going to call that 100% of the people who would possibly buy the subscription. So that doesn't include infants, it doesn't include people in a coma, it doesn't include, anyone who would otherwise not have an internet service or be able to purchase something. And then the average cost is how much it costs per unit or per customer to supply the streaming from Netflix to you. Okay, now I'm going to pick what will be, for the illustration's purposes, the optimal point. So the optimal price is here and the optimal quantity is there. Multiply them together and you get your total revenue. Now, if you take the distance between the average cost and the price at that demand, you will get your profit. Okay, so that's on a normal day. Now, this is what you might see demand looking like in a recession. So the chart more or less slides to the left, sometimes down, and it straightens out, becomes closer to perfectly elastic. So as you can see very quickly on, as the price per unit decreases, more people are willing to buy it, okay? But if you notice, the distance between the purple line, the recession demand, and the average cost, assuming it stays more or less the same, like it would for Netflix, the profit has shrunk massively. In many cases, it would be a loss even. So it would be prudent to change the price. Now, you want to not just maximize total revenue, because if you maximize total revenue, you could just sell as many of the product as you can and without regard for how much it costs. So you could sell it at a loss and your total revenue might be huge, but your profit would be negative and you don't want to lose money. What you should instead do is, on this chart, based off the way I've drawn it, and I have exaggerated some things so that you can clearly see, this is the optimal price to set during a recession so that you have maximized your net profit. And on this chart, it looks like it's almost equivalent, but realistically, the recession sales would be less than your normal sales, unless you manage to, by reducing the cost, capture more market share from your competitors. So it can be an opportunity. Now, what people often do, and what I was talking about before, is, well, people will buy it at this price, so the market will tolerate this price, which means that this is the price that I should go for. It's the most that people will buy it for. But in reality, you could sell it to 6 people for $1 million because they have the money to burn. Say if you instead sold your $8 subscription to 80 million people, that's a lot more than 6 people for $1 million each. In other words, maximizing your per unit profit margin does not necessarily mean you have the most net profit that you could realize. Because really that's what you want to go for, is the optimal level, whether it's raising the price a smidge or lowering it. Now, what situation might this be appropriate? Well, if, say, you had an item that had inelastic demand, something like water or oxygen or medicine or healthcare, where if someone's life is depending on it and you're the only provider, they're willing to pay a pretty penny. And so the demand line will be pretty much vertical at whatever quantity it is that, however many billion people there are who need that product. And you make more money that way. Well, the downside is that's considered price gouging, profiteering, whatever you want to call it. So illegal and unethical. But that isn't to say that any price increase is unethical. Again, I won't stay on that topic very long. If you want to look up price elasticity or anything about supply and demand curves or price demand curves, take a look at Investopedia. They have a decent little dictionary on there. That brings me to competitive advantages. So Netflix has kind of been getting rid of all of their competitive advantages. As mentioned earlier, a competitive advantage is being an established rival. They don't have that anymore. There are many established rivals, and some of them with better offerings. Anyway, so let's first start with the recommendation system. So originally, in case anyone forgot, they used a star system, and so as long as you were consistent in the way you rated videos you viewed, then it would pair you with other people of similar interest, or who have watched the same videos and rated them similarly. And if they watched a video that you haven't yet, they would give you an estimate of what you would think of the video. And it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. I found a lot of content that I would have otherwise ignored just because of how it was recommended. However, they decided they wanted to switch to a binary system, much like YouTube and all of these other places, because thumbs up, thumbs down is cool, right, kids? It's not going to attract more people having thumbs up, thumbs down. Their excuse at the time was, oh, well, we get more interactions by this because people use thumbs up and thumbs down more. Sure, assuming that that's true, if regardless of how many people do it, it decreases the effectiveness of it, there's no point to having it anymore, which is what happened. And so by saying thumbs up, thumbs down, and having nowhere to say in between how much you liked it or disliked it, that's a lot of information that's being left on the table. So then it's giving you, 97% recommendations because, excuse me, what was a popular, say you liked Stranger Things, the TV series they released before it went crazier. But say you liked Stranger Things, everyone else liked Stranger Things. Suddenly it's giving you recommendations from all kinds of people who also gave that a thumbs up, regardless of if you liked it just a little bit and they loved it, and then you're going to get something that they maybe didn't like very much that you would absolutely hate, or maybe that they loved and you absolutely would hate. That's just the nature of cutting out all of that data. So anyway, with inaccurate recommendations, the recommendation system no longer provides value, especially since I initially suspected that the motivation behind it was just so they could justify recommending more of their kind of garbage content to you, which isn't really well thought out anyway, because say you're getting more content recommended to you, if it's not good content, you're less likely to watch more of it or more of other things. And if you're not watching stuff on Netflix or finding things you like, you're more likely to say, well, why do I have this? Right? So that was that, but hey, that's their thing. So the next competitive advantage they kind of threw away was their content mix. As I mentioned, they brought on a lot of garbage content, and so with adding content volume, which is good, and some people might like that stuff that I've called garbage. Not all of it is terrible. Some of it's pretty good, but having that much content that someone isn't interested in buries the stuff that they want to watch. So muddying the quality overall reduces people's impression of your content. And then another huge problem they had, which was bringing on single seasons of long-running series, or multiple years of a TV series. Which means that, say you love the show, Netflix doesn't have it, well, what are you going to do? Go find it where it is, which is another streaming service. So Netflix is feeding people off of their platform by having single season content. So even though it's more content, they're better off not having it at all if it means that someone goes to another platform and then finds, you know what, I like this stuff more than Netflix, so maybe I don't stay here. Then there's a whole other problem of short seasons, which is not just limited to Netflix. It's much like the concept of having too many streaming services to begin with. People and the market can only tolerate so many. So if you love a TV series, but there's only like 8 episodes, originally it was 11 or 13, and they brought it down to 8, and I think in some cases there's 6. I think one series or a couple series on Netflix had like 3 3-episode seasons, that's not a TV series. That's barely a mini-series, and it, generally speaking, isn't even like conclusive, because mini-series are usually like a 4-hour-long sort of thing, not like 4 20-minute episodes. Anyway. But with these shorter seasons, you get more TV series. But that doesn't mean that people stick around to watch them. It means that you can watch those 8 episodes and then, well, why hang around, especially if Netflix is going to drag its feet and put it out in a year and a half? Well, unsubscribe and come back later. And that's what I recommend you do from now on. But you don't have to, you do what you like. So in that process, in the waiting time, every time that happens, regardless of the series, the more series you may like, but the more likely you are to forget about one series and come back to it, which means less people coming back to Netflix, in this case. It'll apply to any streaming service. And then there's a whole problem with if any streaming platform gets really political and starts mandating that their content follow political content guidelines, regardless of what those politics are, someone that's in the user base isn't going to like it. And you don't have that variety or that tolerance of others in those sorts of situations. And then also all the content becomes very samey. Another competitive advantage that they've kind of tossed to the wind with this specific move is viewing while traveling and on the go. So, I think it was something like anyway, I covered that already. But even cable channels are more accessible than what Netflix is proposing to do. So, if it doesn't have a competitive advantage over the old formats that they were trying to, or had largely made irrelevant, well, why not go back to those? So, they've lost many competitive advantages and subsequently the perceived value of their offerings, and almost the entirety of the perceived value of their offerings, because Netflix at least had a bulk subscriber competitive advantage in that it was offering the value of, okay, well, maybe we're more expensive than these other places, but if you go together with a few friends or family and you get the family and friends account, or just family account, or whatever they want to label it as now, you got value because it was a bulk purchase. The cost individually was lower, and it helped Netflix because it meant that they got some more subscribers. This is now the opposite move that they're taking. Netflix has forgotten that they have direct competitors: Tubi, Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney Plus. There's so many now. I think it's Peacock, Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus. People should realize that you don't want to make everything plus, because then they're going to get confused and it doesn't differentiate your product. That's a topic for another time. And then let alone the indirect competitors. So YouTube, DVDs, cable, other forms of entertainment, all of these things substitute that basic need of entertainment, reading, things like that. If Netflix wants to keep putting its prices up, like if Netflix wants to charge going on $50 a month, well, why not just buy a TV series, like a 20-episode TV series that's an hour long each episode, like people used to do? You could buy it each month at these prices. At the current prices, you could buy it every second month, which is still, it'll keep you busy. And you can rewatch it and not even have to worry about Netflix deciding to censor something. Like Community, I think they pulled an episode out of, and some other things. Just ignore the crazy people on Twitter. Not that everyone on Twitter is crazy, but you know what I mean. Not only that, when Netflix started, they realized they were competing with piracy. This move is obviously bad for customers, and it's pushing them to other platforms. And it's only going to hurt investors because Netflix is seeking short-term profits at the expense of long-term growth and sustainability. I don't see them changing their course. And I think people have kind of hit their limit on what they're willing to pay for, because the market can only sustain so much. People can only pay for so many services at a time, and they will only do so not even just because their earnings allow it, but because if they're not using something, most people recognize it's not worth keeping, whether it's immediately or a little bit down the road. People are going to cancel the service they don't use. So you can only sustain so many streaming services at a time. The sad thing is that the content, unless every streaming service makes their content available on the other streaming services and sort of share profits, or if someone creates one streaming service or one service that lets you automatically switch between streaming services for one reasonable cost, there's content that might be fantastic, but people aren't going to be able to watch it. And if people can't watch it, or not enough people watch it, you can't chat with your friends about it, and then it doesn't get super popular, which means people aren't going to come to the platform to watch it. Sort of vicious circle there. This is such a bad move in so many respects. Like, following the pandemic, they probably had a huge spike in viewers, and now I should only drop from here, again, unless they decided, you know what, we recognize that we've kind of gotten to a certain level, and all these competitors are inflating their prices. Let's streamline our offering. Let's lower the prices substantially and make it compelling for people to want to buy Netflix over something else. But that's just my opinion. If you have a different one, please let me know. If I haven't covered something that you think is a substantial, just smack yourself in the face, Netflix, because you should think of this, or me just facepalm because I should have thought of this argument. Please let me know in the comments. But yeah, good luck to anyone who has Netflix. If you don't care, you don't care. Just keep doing you, that's fine. But if we just go along with this, I will say all of the other, Netflix is, because it was such a leader, everyone else is more or less going to follow suit. So if Netflix gets away with doing this, you can bet everyone else is waiting in anticipation to jump on the same bandwagon. Anyway, have a good night or day or whatever it is, wherever you are. See ya.